Welcome, everybody. We'll get started in just a couple minutes.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining. We're just giving everyone another minute before we jump in. Nice to see some familiar names and new faces as well.
All right, I think we'll get started. Um, if Thanks, Ika. So there's three of us on, myself, Corey, Desi, and Ika, and we're part of the Diabetes Wise team. And as we go along today, if you have some questions, put them in the Q&A box, should be at the lower part of your screen, or you might have to click the more to have it show up. If you can't find it, just drop it in the chat and we'll be able to get to it. But we're looking forward to making this a conversation and talking about a lot of different things, whatever kind of is relevant to the Diabetes Wise theme. So my name's Corey Hood. I'm part of the Diabetes Wise team. I've been with the team since the beginning when we launched it in 2019. I'm a clinical psychologist and work a lot in health and diabetes and devices and treatments. And I work at Stanford University as a professor there. I also have type 1 diabetes myself and celiac, and it's really great to be joined by um, another um, uh, colleague from Stanford, Desi. You want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah, great to be here. My name's Dessi Zaharieva. I'm an instructor and exercise physiologist here at Stanford in PEDS. And I also have type 1 diabetes close to 30 years now. A lot of my reason for going into diabetes research and understanding glucose management around exercise kind of stemmed from personal challenges and struggles that I navigated as a kid growing up and kind of lack of guidance and trying to learn a lot about why the body did certain things. So we have been hoping to add more resources and constantly add more to the Diabetes Wise website. I've been involved with the Diabetes Wise team since 2023 to start integrating exercise resources, which we'll talk about a lot today. So thanks all for being here.
Yeah, and we're recording this, and so if you miss some part or you just want to watch it over and over again, feel free to. It'll be on the website soon after this. I already see some great questions coming in, and so we'll do a quick kind of intro about what Diabetes Wise is and what the content, the sections on exercise. We'll talk a little bit about that, and then we'll just start diving into some of the questions as we go along. I think they're relevant to what we'll talk about. So a little bit of background, Diabetes Wise was launched in 2019. It was kind of an outgrowth of work that we've been doing, understanding all the kind of human factors that go into taking care of diabetes, and specifically understanding devices and technologies, and really wanting to give people with diabetes and the providers that take care of them, give them an opportunity to view what's out there that's not maybe that's in a kind of unbranded, unbiased way. I think I always say our really only bias is that we think that these devices and technologies can really help you. And so um, we wanted to create this platform to do that. And we've got a lot of different sections that we'll talk about, but you can find, you can identify CGMs and different ways to monitor glucose and compare them to each other. You can think about insulin delivery. You can think about a lot of different tools that are available to manage it. And then we're really excited a few years ago. Um, Dessi and some of our longtime funders from the Helmsley Charitable Trust suggested, we really need to do some more with exercise, and so we've been fortunate the last few years to really have that become really, I think, in many ways, like a parallel to the device piece. So we have the big, we still focus a lot on devices, but we have this similarly robust focus on exercise. And so maybe Desi, you can tell a little bit more about that and how it started and why it started.
Definitely. Korey, you and I have been longtime colleagues. And so I think part of starting this work with DiabetesWISE together was there's all these great tools and resources on the website about kind of how to navigate all the technology options out there. There's new devices being launched all the time. Try to keep up with all of these devices. And then for me on the exercise side, I was always getting questions of like, how do we navigate this? Each commercially available system or non-commercial system has different names and targets and different things you can do with it. And I was hearing from the community quite a bit when I would present or reach out to community members that people just didn't know where to go to find those resources. And it was often just Googling, and there's many different websites people would go to, but the exercise resources just felt a little bit limited. There's a lot of our colleagues, not part of DiabetesWISE, that also have exercise resources. And I think one unique part of what we do is we want it to be a hub where we house a lot of these resources. As we mentioned, we're neutral and unbiased. We're not trying to say we are the best website out there, but we do want to just bring all of these other resources together. Other groups that have created resources, at least we can house them here and tell people about them. So that was an opportunity for us to also learn more from the community of what people wanted to see. I can tell you just a couple of examples. Data or research on older adults above 65 with type 1 diabetes around exercise, very limited data. Younger kids under 5, also very limited data around how to manage exercise. So we listen from the community and people with type 1 diabetes, and we try to add those resources based on what people have asked for. So we're still working on that and adding more and more content all the time, but we're excited to be here to be able to share that with you all.
Yeah, and one thing that, as you were mentioning that, it made me think that to mention also that both of us work in different settings where we're interacting a lot with people with diabetes, whether it's kind of educational role, it's advice, it's some kind of clinical role. But what's always interesting to me is that um, I don't think anybody has ever figured out what the exact right thing to do is with exercise. I mean, every person that I've ever talked to, and I know personally for myself, um, that it's just one of those things that kind of feels almost elusive to be able to figure out all the right parts. And I think even with the new technologies, it still can be a little bit hard. Do you hear that, Desi, from a lot of the people or the providers or other people with diabetes that ask you questions about it?
Absolutely. And this actually sort of addresses one of the questions that I see coming up in the Q&A. And it was essentially like, are AID systems taking out some of the knowledge, skills, and abilities around problem solving and self-care? I'll put that back to you, Korey, in a second. I just, it's really interesting because so many different devices are out there and it's hard to keep track. Just last year, Professor Dr. Otmar Moser and I, with a group of 25 other colleagues and experts in the exercise field from around the world, got together and we spent close to a year and a half putting together this consensus document on AID and kind of exercise guidelines, how to navigate each commercially available system. And I will tell you that by the time it was launched and online, there were other systems that were already becoming available outside, the US, and some that were available in Europe and not here. And so it's hard to be on top of all of these different systems, but we're doing our best because what we know is that each system kind of functions in its own unique way. So I do think that it's taking away at least a little bit of the guessing, but at the same time, I will say with a caveat, these systems are often not built with exercise in mind. And that means that there's a lot of tips and tricks and ways that we have to sort of lie to the system a little bit or work with it and tell it these things because exercise is just not inherent to these systems. We have to work with them so they can work better for us. So I'll pass that back to you, Korey, if there's anything you wanted to add, but I thought that was a great question.
Yeah, yeah, no, I think it's a great question, and as we go along, we'll answer some, on the Q&A screen, and then we'll do some just live like we're doing right now. But I think that the other part about the question that's really interesting is that when we think about these automated insulin delivery systems, I think people have long talked about this idea that, what if people don't know what to do in certain situations? If they've got things running automatically, do they all of a sudden, one of the terms people have talked about is this idea of becoming de-skilled. And now, we're 10 years into the um, maybe not quite that long, but with studies and I mean, we're a long time into these systems. And I think that what we're noticing is that people really don't become de-skilled, but what they do is they have to learn kind of a new set of skills for managing those things. There's still so many things that come up with them, unfortunately. There's still alarms, there's still, infusion issues, and then I think there's another question earlier on, maybe by the same person, Michael, that, talking about if you can add to any kind of activity trackers to these systems. And right now, that's not available on any of the commercial systems. And I think that people who can cobble that together can do it. But really, how great would it be if on these systems it knew that you were moving and walking, and it would account for that, just like whenever you enter or that there are meals being eaten. So I think that I do see them as incrementally as an improvement on our ability to manage. And I do think that systems will get better and better over time. And I worry less and less about this idea that people aren't going to be good problem solvers. I think that there's still enough about diabetes that they still have to really be engaged and really be vigilant about taking care of it.
Totally. I definitely agree with that. And one of my areas of research is actually integrating wearable technology with these devices. And, for us, it's just really important, even just taking a step back, is how do we integrate some of this activity tracker data into, say, the medical records, right? Before we can integrate it into a commercially available system, providers often don't even know like how active their patients are. And so we've been working with our clinical team to talk to our educators, to talk to our clinical staff and just say, would it be helpful if you have kids that are on activity trackers and you see that data come up in the medical records, like in Epic. And you could then see, are your kids that you see in clinic meeting exercise guidelines? It gives you an opportunity to bring up the discussion of exercise. Maybe first we start there to better understand sort of patterns, trends, getting the data into a platform like that or a dashboard. But I agree, kind of in that trickle effect is the next thing we would love to see is how these can integrate with AID systems. I will just kind of briefly put a plug in that some data will be coming out at this upcoming conference, which we'll share about shortly, looking at all of these differences, like whether it's activity tracker data or lactate data or ketone data. Can this all be helpful in the context of exercise? And so we're still learning a lot about this, but a lot of studies are now being conducted to understand few more metrics than just glucose around exercise.
It's great. One of the things that I wanted to highlight a couple of parts of Diabetes Wise that I think maybe have some relevance to some of the questions that are coming in. One of the things we wanted to do, and is available on the website, if you go to the device finder or you just go into the device library and start looking for different things, you can put in, I want to learn more about, automated insulin delivery. I want to learn more about insulin pen systems. You can engage it that way, and we try to do a really good job of adding all the features. And one of the things we worked hard on over the last couple of years is to add to the features part what how this can maybe help from an exercise perspective as well. And so I mean, you can imagine somebody even going from not being on CGM to being on CGM, then has an awareness of what glucoses are in real time. But then there's, more steps to it with automated insulin delivery and other things. And so I think that I think there's some great features on there where you can compare and contrast and kind of find what's right for you. And one thing I don't think I mentioned at the beginning is that, all of the content on DiabetesWISE is free, and you can access all of it anytime. You can take it and share it. Um, we we've had funding from the Helmsley Charitable Trust to do this project, to build it, and then to continue this work. And so they've been really generous and allowed us to make everything free. And so we just want these to be good resources that people can use. Um, I don't know. Does he, I talked a little bit about the device side. Are there any certain parts of the exercise content that you're really excited about? I know that you've been working hard on like handouts and some other things, but are there any parts that you're really eager to get out to people?
Definitely. I will say that one of the areas I'm most excited about, it took quite a bit of time, but when we looked at the device finder and kind of compare and contrast side of the technology, we also were getting so many comments about all these different activity trackers because what's happening now is that some of them will allow you to see CGM data on a watch. And so it's not saying it's integrated directly with your AID system. Some of the non-commercial systems do have that ability. But I think it's really interesting that certain watches will allow you to just have your glucose data either displayed or even just a high or low alert. And I think when some people think about this, they think they're the watches that cost thousands of dollars. And look, they're not $10 watches, but we've been able to put online from the, lowest cost to some of the fancier watches that you can compare all of these different devices and see watches, the ones that integrate with CGM, depending on what system they integrate with, it will tell you all of those details. And it even talks about here in the US, like certain ones you may be able to get coverage for through insurance. And so all of those things we were learning from the community that people just wanted information about, they didn't know about. So that was kind of one area on the tech side. We integrated the exercise piece. But specifically on the exercise resources, there's tons of areas that I'm excited about. One of them that I want everybody to be on the lookout for, we are just in the process of finalizing and hopefully will be online very soon before the ATTD conference. We have close to 15, one pager sort of user integrated guides for exercise on all of these different topics, whether it's altitude and how to manage glucose levels at altitude, how to manage heat and glucose levels, how to manage it in cold temperatures, and all of these different scenarios. What do you do with competition stress? So we heard from many clinicians around the US and many patients that reached out to us to say, we would have loved to see these types of resources and just have something that's downloadable. So we are making that freely downloadable for people and it will be online very soon. But those are still coming. And right now we've got like a ton of other exercise resources for people to check out. I already mentioned sort of older adults with type 1. We have information. I get a lot of questions on how do you keep your devices on, especially in the heat or, with contact sports. And so we've got whole sections on various different companies and overlay tapes that you can use. And again, we're not sponsored or funded by any of these. This was an opportunity for us to just broadly list out as many of these different companies that we heard of. If there's any that we're missing, please let us know. Again, we're always really open to sharing with the world of what is available, and people can test out certain overlay tapes for free. They just have to reach out to the companies and see if they offer free trials.
I'm realizing from one of the questions that Neil sent in that we don't have anything on the website about music. and its effect on listening to music and its effect on blood sugars and exercise. I can tell you, and I'm interested to hear what you think, Desi, but I mean, there have been studies that show people perceive less of an effort when they're listening to certain music while they exercise. So the perception might be, and maybe there's some extra effects on, heart rate or things like that. But people do perceive that it's easier in some situations with music versus maybe no music or certain kinds of music. But I don't think I've ever seen anything related to blood sugar and exercise. I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on that, Desi?
So me too. I will say, like, I am happy to look into it and see maybe there is. And I apologize if someone's put out some research on that because that's a really interesting topic. I will share a little bit of a personal story. For me, competing at kind of the highest level when I was competing in Taekwondo, one of the biggest stressors was competition stress and having to navigate that. My biggest like outlet was sort of music and meditations and visualizations. And I've been asked this question in the past, and I don't think that there's a ton of research on this, but I will say from my anecdotal N of one kind of data, I always like to share that one of the biggest differences from my most successful year at the World Championships to years in the past where I didn't medal and struggled a lot. One of the main things that I changed was actually visualizations, listening to music, and more kind of meditations. So now things like, Insight Timer, the Calm app, again, we're not funded by these companies. Those are just, there's some free options out there where you can download and listen to music. For me, just that calming, no words and kind of meditative sounds have been very helpful for me, not only for getting to sleep, but also in kind of stressful situations, pre-competition. But, again, a little anecdotal. Wonder if Neil's got other stories too, but it's a great question.
Yeah, yeah. I in any of the kind of exercise that I've done, I do find that music um, makes me feel like it's almost done, and I can move on to the next thing. And so there's often like this some help to it, but I do think that we can look around a little bit more and add that if we find it. Um, there's another question in here, and then maybe Desi, we can talk about some other pieces. But one of the questions that came in from Kathy is about struggling to um, not go low, even with very low insulin on board. Um, and there's some extra parts of it related to other medication, but um, but I do think that, I mean, this is something that we've started to build out content for. You talked about having it for older adults, some content for older adults, but I also think there's probably something here with the kinds of snacks and the timing and things like that. I don't know if you have any insights on that. I mean, well, let me first say, definitely talk to your healthcare team about this, your diabetes care team, and get their advice. But that would be one thing I would think. And I don't know, Desi, if you have some thoughts.
Yeah, it's a great question. I will start by saying this area of GLP-1s are understudied. I think there's a lot of people that are on this type of medication, and we don't fully know the impact on, especially type 1 diabetes, GLP-1s, and exercise. There's a little bit more data on type 2 and GLP-1s. Not usually specific to exercise, but I think a few areas I kind of wanted to highlight here is one, it's an area of growing research. Even for me, it's an area of interest. We hope to do more studies in this area. I also wanted to mention this idea of starting exercise with low insulin on board or low IOB is a great first step, right? I think many of the challenges, especially working in pediatrics, is I see many of the kids that I talk to struggle with even starting exercise with low IOB. That means you have to typically plan far in advance. It can already be a challenge. But I will say, part of the position statement and information that we've put online and even on DiabetesWISE is whether you plan or don't plan for exercise is already going to have different tips and tricks, right? If you plan well in advance, maybe different snacks are going to be needed. If you're not a planner, which is most of the kids that I see, it's just more realistic of what life is. You're not always going to plan 2 hours in advance. And in those instances, snacks things like incorporating protein intake. We've got some colleagues in Australia that I'm working with that will be presenting some data on this, but incorporating protein pre-exercise may be an avenue for reducing the risk of lows during aerobic-based activity. So it's really exciting to be in this time while these studies are happening that we get to even talk about this. You're almost hearing it here first before we get to present a lot of this at some of these conferences like ATTD. But I will say carbs and protein and snacks are always a good option. In addition to, I saw the question said something about timing. And I think if insulin on board is really high, timing is one of the key factors if you have a chance to change. If there's high IOB, delaying exercise by an hour or two is going to help reduce that circulating level of insulin on board. So, one of the great ways that we can play around with activity. But of course, if it's something like basketball practice that always happens at 4 o'clock, we don't have that flexibility. So, we understand that those are some of the challenges we have to navigate.
And I'll also add just some, personal experience. It also depends so much on whatever the activity is, and I can kind of bunch it into like working with weights and lifting and things like that versus something that's more aerobic. And that seems to help me have a better idea of what I need to do going into it. And I know it's kind of a crude way of thinking about it, but that's worked for me to kind of and and I also find that it depends on your family and all your other schedules and things like that. But sometimes for me, like mid-morning is better because I'm not a big breakfast person, so I don't often have any insulin on board, and so there's just these kind of things that over time, over 25 plus years of having it, you kind of figure out some things that work for you, and they may not be working for everybody, but that's one of the things that we tried to do on the website is to share stories and to have wisdom from people that and find some of their solutions that might work for you, and I think that that's something that we tried to do, and I think we've done that fairly well.
Yeah, we also do share a lot. Like I love that point, Corey, but the data is also there to support this. So
Yeah.
not only hearing like personal lived experience, it's really exciting because a lot of the resources and things that we've built online on DiabetesWISE are evidence-based. We didn't just kind of make these up because it worked for me or for Corey. That could be part of the reason because wisdom stories are really helpful to know that this is what worked for one person or a group of people. But I will say a lot of the evidence is backed there with research, and so even that morning fasted exercise, resistance exercise in the morning, we see glucose levels can be a little bit more stable or sometimes rise compared to afternoon exercise where typically there is a lot more circulating insulin on board. So the data is there to support that, and some of my colleagues in Canada work on that, and others as well. So we like to be able to share that on DiabetesWISE as well.
One of the questions came in, and we're going to talk a little bit about some things that we're excited about with the upcoming conference. And so maybe at that time, we can also talk about if there's any new devices or systems or things like that. So the person who wrote in that, just to let you know, we'll definitely get to that. I think you started to hit on this a little bit in with one of Neil's questions about, you know, so maybe I'll pose it to you this way. Are there, is it any better or any different to try and bunch together exercise into one big workout versus maybe trying to do it in a small section at the beginning of the day and at the end of the day? And maybe there's not like a totally right answer, but I don't know if you have any thoughts on that from the data and your experiences, what, to kind of help with Neil's question.
Definitely. I think we all know if we have any lived experience or talked to people with type 1 diabetes, but the effects of exercise are so positively potent in terms of glucose responses, right? It's insulin sensitizing. Exercise has effects for not only during exercise, but for many hours in recovery. And those could be all good things, but also add layers of challenge. And I think it's a great question because the idea is one exercise and then you take a little break. That activity that you did may impact your glucose levels for 24, even 48 hours later. So something you do today could impact your glucose levels 2 days from now. And I think that's really important to think about. The addition of exercise every single day or multiple times a day is sort of like a stacking effect if you think about it. So it's going to sort of increase that risk of hypoglycemia for a prolonged period of time. And there is data to show this, like long bouts of exercise, that insulin sensitivity could be increased and heightened for a greater length of time. But I think a really important part is how you replenish those glycogen stores after exercise. So it also depends on when you finish a really long, say, tournament or long bout of exercise, what are you doing to sort of replenish the stores in your muscles? I think that's also a really key factor in how your glucose can be, impacted in the hours after activity. But I will say, absolutely, there could be this stacking effect. And we see that if people do kind of tournament style competitions or multiple days of long bouts, or we say like unusually active periods, there's just that heightened risk of hypoglycemia after exercise. So definitely something to look out for. I often give the example of if you're regularly active, even just a few days a week, and then you go into sort of when we have winter closure or breaks, and you take a 2 week break, and either you're on holidays or you're just sitting on the couch and definitely exercising less, we already see changes in our glucose responses. It's pretty immediate, and you can see that from even just a short period of a week or two of changing your exercise behaviors.
Great. So one of the things that we talked about on Diabetes Wise, we've long had this section that we've called wisdom, and there you can watch videos of people, you can listen to their stories, you can read about experiences they've had, and there's a number of them that are focused on maybe someone could be reluctant to try a new device or wants to keep it the same way, and how they kind of got used to using devices. So there's a lot of content in there, but we're also working on some new content around, thinking about like what's something I've done with diabetes that's wise, what's something that I've done with diabetes that's not so wise or unwise. And so for those that are attending, if you have any thoughts, you want to drop it into the chat. Like it was wise that I did this, it was unwise that I did this, and you know the more humorous they are for the unwise, probably the better, because we all have those. But I'll start. I think that one of the things I've found that I think has been wise to do for my diabetes is really to be connected to other people. And that's sometimes hard because I work so much in diabetes that outside of it, I don't really want to talk about it too much or be around. But it really is one of those things that sometimes I have to push myself to do, but is so helpful. And really, I've thought of that as kind of a wise thing that I've done that's related to diabetes. I think another one is just asking people for their advice or their experiences, because I can't tell you how many times, even I think being pretty deep in the diabetes world, that somebody says something and then I try it and it changes something for the better. Um, so this kind of idea that it's kind of diabetes is pretty humbling, and so I think that there are a lot of these times when I might be talking to somebody and I'm like, oh, I can't believe that's such a good idea. I'm going to try that. So I think that having those conversations is really important. Um, and then kind of maybe a simpler one. I was diagnosed in my as a young adult, and so I didn't get to go to the diabetes camp as a kid and things like that. But one of the best things and wisest things I've done is to go to diabetes camp as staff or attending because somebody else is staff, and really just having that experience, I think, has been and so I hope that there are more opportunities for the adults out there that are in those kind of similar situations, and Connected in Motion, a number of other groups, kind of do these great programs that I think are helpful. I don't know, before I talk about the unwise, Desi, do you have any that you want to share?
Yeah, I'll piggyback off of what you just said because for me, I was diagnosed as a child and still just decided I thought I was the only one with diabetes in the world. I didn't want to communicate with other people with diabetes. I felt like my condition was different from everyone else's. And that was just a lack of understanding, right? And I never went to diabetes camp as a kid. And now I volunteer and help at diabetes camp as an adult. And looking at what those experiences do to kids and adults, like I've also done adult retreats with type 1 diabetes. And it is so important to have a community. I was so isolated and thinking I was the only one navigating this and struggled a lot and didn't have anyone to talk to. And some of the greatest wisdom that I've gotten is from these events and retreats that I have done, whether it's, yeah, Connected in Motion, I Challenge Diabetes, Diabetes Training Camp. We have so many groups and children with diabetes. We have so many events that happen where people get connected and kids or adults or families get to share stories. And those like wisdom moments have been really life changing for me because you learn from each and every person something new that, may not have been taught in clinic. And so that community aspect was really important for me. So I will say, even though I plugged in much later in life, it's never too late.
Yeah.
It's always good to just get involved if you can. And that's been really important.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I wanted to also share an unwise thing, which was that, and this just happened a few weeks ago, and surprisingly was really the first time to this extent. But so I used an insulin pump and was letting it charge before I went out, actually going to an NBA basketball game, and got distracted or whatever. And so I went to the game without my pump. And I didn't realize it until probably an hour or 45 minutes in when I was reaching for my phone to give some insulin. It was totally lost. And so that was one of the, so I think that happens. But really, I was kicking myself for that because um, not only did it, not only was it kind of like I was a little embarrassed about it, but also like I couldn't enjoy what I was hoping to do because now I've got to figure out a backup plan. I had inhaled insulin, Afrezza with me, so I could at least like keep it fine until I got back home. But it really was it could have been so much better. And so those experiences where diabetes kind of takes something away from my enjoyment, I think those are the ones that are kind of the most frustrating, and it all kind of started with just not being totally aware of what I was doing. I don't know if you probably have had experiences like that too, but I don't think you want to share.
Yeah, more times than I can count. I think having diabetes for 30 years, this is bound to happen,
Yeah.
right? So, one funny story, as funny now, but in the moment was not the funniest. As a teenager, I remember going up to a friend's cottage, and for us, I'm from Canada originally, so cottages, cottage weekends, like on the lake, were really exciting moments for us. We would go out on a boat and we'd be tubing or wakeboarding or whatever it was on the water. And I remember it was my first kind of weekend away as a teenager with my friends. And as soon as we got there, I jumped in the water and, basically I took my pump off because, it's not waterproof. So that was fine. I'm thinking like I planned in advance, but I remember just as I got up there, I'm a teenager, remember? So I had changed my pump site and went directly into the water. And as soon as we started on, the water, I fell off of the tube and my pump site immediately ripped out. And I just said
Mm.
that was my only backup infusion set. And I'm a kid, right? I didn't have syringes. I did bring backup supplies, but I just used it, silly me, right before I went into the water. And then as soon as I hit the water, it fell off. And this like
Yeah.
really exciting weekend turned into like immediately now my parents had to meet me and the dad had to drive me home like 3 hours, and it turned into like a really emotional and sad moment. And it was just one of those situations where what could I have learned? I thought I was prepared, but maybe the planning
Yeah.
aspect wasn't my strong suit. And so I think I've now probably overcompensated that anytime I travel, I have probably enough supplies for like everyone around me with type 1. But I think that's also something a lot of us with type 1 diabetes carry way too many devices when we travel, maybe just to have some backup. But yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and it's a really nice segue to one of the things we were also going to talk about, which was some upcoming sessions and upcoming things at the ATTD meeting, which is Advanced Technologies and Treatments for Diabetes. It happens every year in Europe, and it's usually, I think one of the most for me and for the stuff that we do at Diabetes Wise, I think really one of the most impactful meetings. Um, but one of the things I also know about that meeting is there's probably going to be 150 other people with type 1 diabetes there. And if I forget something, I can probably ask somebody else for, a replacement. Um, but we wanted to talk a little bit about this meeting and some of the things we're excited about. And we haven't seen them yet, but we wanted to give you a little bit of a sense of some of the content that's coming up. I have a few, but I don't know, Desi, if you want to share a couple, maybe the ones that you're speaking in and the kind of content that you're going to be talking about, because I think it's pretty exciting.
Definitely. I love this conference. It's sort of like a family vibe. It's much smaller than kind of ADA, but I feel like the technology and exercise aspect for me is kind of what I enjoy most and really love to like see what's out there. So I'll be presenting at a few different sessions, and even if you're not attending, we're happy to share kind of more updates after the conference. So I'll be presenting on sort of clinical trial data versus real world data. And I think what's really important is we often run these clinical trials in very standardized settings, low insulin on board. We do all these structured things that we control for. And that's not really what happens in the real world. So I kind of am excited to share a little bit of like a sort of maybe the opposite of what people would expect. I want to give people a different aspect of, even though I'm one of those people that carries out clinical trials, there may be some, challenges around doing these really structured studies and give people this idea that real world data is super important to gather to find out like what do we do with high insulin on board or other things like that. I'll also be presenting a session on older adults and its real world data with adults over 65 years of age with type 1. And we don't have any real data that I'm aware of with exercise in type 1 in real world settings. So I'll be really excited to be able to share that with some of my colleagues from UNC. And the last one that we're going to be presenting on is a Helmsley session. So it's our first Helmsley Charitable Trust session that I'll be co-chairing with Denise Dalton. And we'll be sharing on all of the different sort of type 1 diabetes exercise initiative, real world data studies that are happening and funded by Helmsley right now. So part of that is talking about the protein and exercise data. Part of it is talking about menstrual cycle and glucose responses in type 1 diabetes. There's just a lot of excitement around these areas that have been understudied for a very long time. So that'll be the first time we've had a Helmsley run session at a session like ATTD. So we're excited. What about you, Korey? Anything you want to share?
Yeah, one of the things that happens at ATTD is they do a tech fair, and they have I don't know if it's maybe 30 or 35 different kind of exhibits of relatively small companies that maybe are developing an idea or have something that's just kind of new. And the point is to talk about it, to get people interested in it, and sometimes they're even seeking support and funding to kind of grow something that they're working on. So I always spend a little bit of time walking through that. There's a couple groups there that are working on some interesting things. You've probably heard about T1D1, which is a mobile app that and they're going to be presenting and sharing some of their information and data about, it's good guidance for how to use glucose data in your everyday life. And I think that there's going to be some interesting things. So they're going to be presenting. There's a group called PharmaSens, which is working on kind of an integrated CGM and patch pump, which we've always had we've never been able to kind of put those two pieces together. And so they're going to likely be presenting some data on like some first steps of that, which I think will be really interesting. And then one of the other areas, there's a group called T1D Scout that has been working on genetic screening for type 1 diabetes and pairing it with antibody screening. And so um, one of the that's also kind of connected to some of my interests. I actually did my dissertation on almost 25 years ago on newborn genetic screening for type 1 diabetes and trying to understand the psychological impact and how people understand, how mothers in particular understand information when they're given this when their newborn is, in the first year of life and they're trying to understand what all of this information means. And there's been a kind of a resurgence of interest in that in the last few years with some new treatments and new products that can delay the onset of type 1 diabetes. And so I'm also speaking in a session that's on, what do people understand about it, and what are the options once they know that they're positive? What are the things that people can do? So from a psychological perspective, thinking about, okay, I've got this massive amount of information now, and it's kind of stressful. What am I going to do about it? So there's quite a few sessions this year on that because there's some new treatments that I think are going to be talked about in the next couple of years too. So those are a couple of things I'm excited about. There's also a little bit here and there on AI, which I think is we're going to hear and see a lot more of that. And one of the things that we're working on at DiabetesWISER is trying to integrate some of that information as well, because it's anything that's around decision making, decision guidance. You can put in data. We don't necessarily recommend it, but you can put data into these different tools and it could give you some guidance on it. I mean, there's a lot of different ways that people are going to use this information. So I'm excited about a few of those sessions to hear what people that are leading the field around the world, what they're thinking about it. And then one other thing um, that I think is really important is you saw over the last year or two, and this also gets to one of the questions about some new devices, but
Mm.
you've seen over the last year or so that a couple of the automated insulin delivery systems have gotten approval to be used in people with type 2 diabetes who are on insulin, but it's still really, you know, really just kind of a developing area. And I don't think that we know a lot yet about why people decide to do it. If they do, are there differences for people with type 1 versus type 2 as they think about it and start it and use it? And so I'm interested in, there's a couple of sessions that are focused on these different technologies in type 2 diabetes. And so I think that'll be really important for some of the work that we're doing. Um, so I've shared a lot. We've talked a lot. I was going to go back to a couple of the questions. I was interested to hear what you thought, Desi, about there's a little bit of there's been a lot of interest, not just in diabetes, but in lower carb diets and with exercise. And do we have stuff on the site that's about that kind of guidance on certain kinds of foods and things like that? But also, is there what do we know about that and how safe it is and anything that you might want to add on that?
Yeah, there's definitely a large area of interest in this of low carb diets. I will say it's not my area of research right now. I have worked with some colleagues on a few kind of studies, but I will say some of the leading people that I follow to understand a little bit more in this area. Andrew Kutnick has done a lot of work on low carb diets, and he's an exercise physiologist and has shared a lot of information on kind of the safety of doing low carb diets around exercise. Laura Nally has presented in this area as well. But I will say, like, it's an area of interest for so many people. I will say also that, well, we work in pediatrics, right? And I think one of the most important areas is growth for children. And so for us, This is not like a primary focus for me in terms of like dietary intake and how people manage their diabetes with food. But I will say we just hired on in the last year a postdoc that is working on the nutrition side of things here at Stanford. And so Miriam Talbot is working in that field. And we're always kind of trying to stay up to date with as much as we can on how to educate around different diets. And we have to be very aware of not only recommending diets or what people should eat, because we have to be very aware of allergies and challenges of navigating certain foods and availability of certain foods. And it's really hard for people to in the research scheme just say this is what you should be doing, because there are a lot of challenges around people can eat. Also culturally, foods are very different. Like my background of foods from Bulgaria, where I was born, is very different and often not kind of represented in the research aspect. So when we talk about low carb diets, there's also questions of what counts as a low carb diet. Are we talking ultra low carb? Are we talking certain grams of carbs? And I think there's just a lot of research that's being done in this area around how to do it safely. So I think for each and every person, it's going to be unique, but it's important to kind of follow that work from others that are in that field. I don't know, Korey, if you had anything to add as well.
No, I think that I think that one thing I would add is that the I think with diabetes, with management of glucoses, with and with food intake, with exercise, I think that there's always the sense that some bit of moderation is better, and trying to avoid the extremes, so the extreme lows, the extreme highs. And I think there are some extremes with diet too, and we know that we talk about maybe some potentially unhealthy things on the end of eating too much or and too little. There is this kind of right amount that I think people have to find for themselves, and it's a little bit of what you're highlighting. And I think that and I think it would be really helpful, if we can include a little bit more content about this. And I think that, for some of the things that you mentioned, we'll add those, but certainly following guidance and guidelines about and talking with nutritionists about what's the kind of right amount, I think is the best way to do it.
Yeah.
Um,
One thing I guess I didn't jump in when you asked if there was anything on DiabetesWISER right now. We don't specifically have too much on the nutrition side of things. What we do have on the exercise front with nutrition is sort of guidance around treating and preventing hypoglycemia. I do think around exercise, that's one of the most important areas. And we try to give like a variety of different options, but never try to say kind of this is what you need to have. It's just to give people some ideas and a starting point. But like you said, we are very open to also discussing that and integrating that into the website. If anyone has any other ideas of things that they would like to see, please let us know. We'll both be at ATTD, and you can let us know in the chat. We're always looking for guidance on what people want to see and what's missing on the website right now.
yeah. Well, I think that we've covered the open questions, and so I think that maybe what we'll plan for here is, Ike is going to, if you could put back up the slide that has the QR codes that, so if you want some more information, you can go to DiabetesWise. You can follow us on Instagram and LinkedIn. We also have a community called DiabetesWISER. And what's really nice about that is that people can share these different threads. Like one of the first ones we had on there was when the Dexcom G7 came out, and people were talking about the advantages of the G6 versus the G7 and experiences that they had. And so I think there's some really nice resources on there as well. But I don't have anything to add. Desi, anything to add before we wrap up?
Only thing I just wanted to jump in for DiabetesWISER is I know that we've sort of shifted the way the Ask the Expert sessions are going. So this is our first one that we have led this year that is on Zoom like this, and we've got this panel discussion, and We will have like future sessions. We are still finalizing dates, but stay tuned. It's not always going to be myself and Korey, although if you want us to come back, we're happy to do that too. Maybe you're sick of hearing our voices, but we're going to have other people sharing stories, and we have some amazing people lined up. And so stay tuned, but we'd also love your feedback on whether you enjoyed sort of the video version of it, rather than just a Q&A, which was how we've done previous Diabetes Wiser Ask the Expert sessions. So let us know. We're always open to hearing your feedback. And really, it's the best way to have a community to join in and like ask questions and talk to each other. So if you have anything where we always say talk to your healthcare team, but in the interim, since you can't see your providers every day, please check out Diabetes Wiser and you can start your own thread. And if there's anything that we didn't get to today, you can ask questions on there and we'll be sure to jump in and answer those questions. So just know that you're supported in the in between as well, between now and the next session.
Yeah, that was great. That was a great way to sign off. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Desi, for
Oh,
all your insights, and look forward to seeing and hearing from many of you soon.
we really appreciate it. Thanks all for joining.